All right. I want to focus on two particular parts of this NAR settlement. Yes, we have this NAR settlement. I'm not going to address that whole thing. Lots of videos out there, lots of thought leaders and YouTubers and brokers, CEO of EXP, Leo Pareja, has done a lot of really great communication and videos on that. I want to zero in on two particular parts, and this is coming from Mr. Leo Pareja as well as some others. I've gotten a lot of questions from agents on this, and I want to zero in on this guidance that's offered here in these NAR settlement changes FAQs. Paragraph 19, it's publicly accessible on NAR's website. What MLS policies have changed? And I think we're about to all really see how this is going to go down, probably in the first 3 to 6 months. EXP Realty, as an example, is an early mover on this, but I think this is part of what's going on. So, number one, require an MLS to not create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS mechanism that would lead to compensation from one broker to another, right? Essentially, for participants, subscribers, sellers to make offers of compensation to buyer brokers. So with the whole buyer broker field going away, they're just saying they don't want the MLSs to try to skirt around this. Well, what does that mean exactly? What does that mean? Because later on they say you can do IDXs, but if I have an IDX, and I think that the tech companies, to my understanding, the IDX companies that are out there, if it's Chime or Boomtown, Lofty Boomtown, KV Core, any of those, I'm not sure that they're really publicly describing this, but it's the absence of language, the absence of them giving us any guidance on what we're going to be able to edit in our IDX feeds, which it doesn't sound like much. How am I going to effectively get any compensation, method of compensation known in any kind of efficient way, right? Outside of needing to just take every call or respond to every text message from every buyer's agent. I mean, you can thousands of conversations back and forth on this. Well, I think that's what this is attempting to deal with, which is, look, MLSs, we don't want you trying to skirt around this rule by just making a handy little backdoor access to IDX feeds, where basically you would have broker to broker. Think of it like the attorneys, again, agree, disagree with the settlement, agree, disagree with the litigation and all the money that all the attorneys are earning from this. Think of it through the eyes of that prosecuting attorney, the case that they're making of collusion, antitrust, not having competitive companies in the exact same market and industry colluding with each other. They want no way where you could easily communicate. I believe, this is my interpretation now, I'm not an attorney. They want no easy way for the listing agents, the listing brokers, and the buyer brokers to easily communicate those fees, whether it's in the MLS, because obviously that's dead, or what Leo was saying was even outside of the MLS. They don't want any third-party website that an MLS, and the MLS is the focus here in the NAR settlement, because National Association of Realtors, which, by the way, remember, we have separate regulations for each MLS and separate, even further regulations with each state, okay, that are coming to terms. And then further, we have what the cease and desist that the Department of Justice just issued to the state of California on this, which is they want no way for the MLS to serve as a conduit to this kind of what they would say is collusion. We would call it cooperation, because in the custom in the market has been that the buyers shouldn't have to pay for their entirely on their side, shouldn't have to pay for that. So that's how the MLS came about, is literal cooperation, not collusion, in my opinion. Again, just my opinion. I can be wrong. You don't have to agree with me. So they're looking to make sure, they're going to be watching this like a hawk, I believe, not only the attorneys, but the MLSs, because NAR, who owns the MLS trademark, like that MLS copyright name, and all the MLSs that have to be a member of NAR to say that, they are, in a sense here, going to be under a microscope, right? To make sure that they follow this settlement, and if there's anybody who colors outside the lines, that that they rein them back in quickly in an effort of goodwill to follow the settlement. Because obviously, you can't always control exactly what somebody does here, but we can control our response to it. And they're actually even further here, this part, they're even describing this in more detail. Prohibit the use of MLS data or data feeds to directly or indirectly establish or maintain a platform of offers of compensation from multiple brokers or other buyer representatives. So such use such use must result with an MLS terminating the participant. By the way, this is the broker, not the agent, not just the agent, but the actual broker who's the participant. The agents just get to go in there because of the broker. The participant's access to any MLS data and data feeds. Guess what, guys? Data feeds means, in my opinion, I think they're going to have a loose interpretation of this. If I'm NAR, I'm looking to stay away from this with a 10-foot pole, since we finally agreed to some settlement rather than potentially even more in damages and punitive fines and everything else. Data feeds, so that includes IDX feeds, that includes VOW feeds, that includes anything like that. Any of the tech providers try to ratchet on something like that, look, all the MLS is going to come back, in my opinion. And again, this is just me kind of predicting here what's close around the bend, not what's going to happen like 3 years from now, but like literally in 14 days or less. What's going to happen is the MLS is just going to come in and say, hey, you can't do that. Either remove that or we're going to pull your IDX feed. And who knows if they will go 0 to 100 miles an hour on this. They could literally just terminate your MLS membership. There you go, for like the rest of existence. My goodness gracious. So let's say they even didn't go straight to nuclear on that punitive process. Let's say they said, look, either remove that, pseudo buyer broker field that you have in there, or we'll pull the IDX feed. They could decide, like, if a tech provider like Lofty or somebody continued to be the theme of these kinds of infractions, they could just say, Lofty, we're not going to let you do that anywhere. And so I don't think any of the tech companies want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, which means us as the agents, the ones who are actually needing to find out what our buyer will be compensated for their representation, if anything, concessions for their representation, or if they're going to have to pay us all directly as their buyer's agent. It means that there is no, in my opinion now, and I could be wrong, there's no technologically leveraged way. There's no easy system or website or something like that where any of that's going to be organized. It's all going to stay confused. It's going to stay purposely decentralized information gathering, which we would call that like inefficient, right? We would call that whatever. We would call that inefficient. We would call it taking a lot more time and energy, a lot of unknowns for our buyer. I want to buy this house, but now this seller is not even willing to offer any buyer concessions and things like that. And we as a buyer's agent, we want to get paid, but we're also covered under the NAR Code of Ethics that we won't let how we get paid get in the way of doing what's in the absolute best interest of our buyer, which I think most of us would agree to, right? Like, we don't want our commission to get in the way of a buyer getting a home, right? But at the same time, it's going to be completely negotiable between the seller and the buyer, which means if there's any potential seller offers of a buyer concession towards compensating their buyer broker, it's all going to be conditional. And so this is where I think that the tables are going to tilt in favor of the sellers, which means as agents, I believe, this is why you want to be focused on listings. Great, we'll take the buyers out, especially the buyers who are also your sellers. But you want to be focused in on the listings, because the listings that are priced correctly, marketed correctly, and you're an agent who knows what the heck you're doing. Your seller is about to be much more in the driver's seat, I believe, because brokers like EXP now are prohibiting just themselves business decision wise to avoid a lot of these potential entanglements. They're not allowing their listing agents, an EXP agent who takes a listing, and this is starting now, they're not going to allow any buyer broker compensation. So no broker to broker compensation. Again, you can have the seller offer a buyer concession, and as we know with sellers, they can offer that, they can take it away. It can be completely conditional, right? They can say, look, it's a 3% concession to your buyer as long as you bring a full price offer. Anything less than that will be negotiated in the terms of the agreement. Okay? So the seller, you're going to be a lot more in the driver's seat, which means if you're a listing agent, you're going to be, along with your seller, a lot more in the driver's seat, not in terms of directly making decisions for the seller, right? Because that's essentially that decoupling of the listing agent and the offer of any compensation was part of what they were trying to decouple, and decouple these commissions, right? From, instead of competitor to competitor, they want just the seller and the buyer to work this out. But now as the listing agent can offer a number of different avenues and lay out all the different possibilities and options of negotiation, like what we're offering upfront versus what we're offering down the road versus what we're offering for a lower priced offer, or, you know, any kind of terms or conditions in there. I'm going to lay out all those options to my seller, right? I really think it's going to put these two paragraphs here, which, by the way, I fully admit, they're contradictory with other parts of the NAR FAQs that say you can have an IDX, you can publish buyer concessions in the IDX, you can publish them, whatever that means. And here it's kind of contradictory to that, because here they're saying that the MLSs can't do that. So if you look at this through different lenses, if I'm an MLS member and I create a whole separate website or something where I've got like a list of all of these, now am I going to get sued under collusion just like the MLSs or NAR did? So if I've got competitors that I'm also trying to convey information to, do I not just become part of the same microscope? So in essence, there can't be any efficient communication on the topic of broker to broker. EXP is just straight up like saying, we're not going to do that. And I think this is why you're going to see potentially other brokers follow suit. I'm not suggesting you do that, but certainly check with your attorneys and see what they think. But I think over time, most of the brokers are going to get so many of these cases of entanglement where there's plenty of other attorneys who would be glad to find infractions, be glad to find violations of the settlement. And I think we're going to see further clarification and guidance from NAR. And I tend to think that's going to become more constrictive. I don't think over time this is going to become less constrictive. I think it's just going to become sharper and sharper to the point where, kind of like in commercial real estate or like in other countries, like the UK and stuff, let's say they have even buyer agency, but there's no guarantee of any commission on the buyer side, which is great and it's not great. I know I can have a buyer agency agreement, which is also required now, and I can establish what my value is and I can establish what my commission pricing is. But again, it's going to be so dependent on the specific seller that the buyer is making an offer with. It's going to be so completely dependent on the negotiations that take place there. Have there been multiple offers? What are the buyer concessions, if any, the seller's offering up front? And again, I can't, as an agent, in any way suggest and can't suggest that they not consider home just because of that. So I am left on the buyer's side, left with a lot less control. Even though I've got the buyer agency agreement, I'm really not in as much control, because I can say I want to be paid this way, I want to be paid this much, and you owe me even if the seller paid concessions are not enough. And hey, as long as my buyer sees that value and they're willing to pay it side of those concessions out of their own checking account, that's great. But we've kind of got this little thing called ability to pay and affordability issue that comes up. So I think that's going to tilt in favor of the wealthier buyers out there are going to have more. I will submit, though, that I think if I'm the listing agent, I could negotiate some deal with my seller who's also going to be a buyer, right? Because they've got probably some equity tied up in the home that they could use rather than having to pay me cash right out of their checking account. So I think you're going to see all kinds of creative ways here where the buyer's agent, I'm trying to wrangle in the biggest risk that I have which is my time and my energy. Those are my two most limited resources. And if I'm expending those upfront, which most of that process occurs upfront picking out the homes, getting to the homes first, writing up the offer. Do I even have an accepted offer? Then I got to work through any of those contingencies, any of that kind of stuff. I'm spending a lot of my time and energy up front without any guarantee of what I'm going to get paid per hour. Okay. And so I think that's going to be the dynamic we're going to see going forward. Please, if this has been thought-provoking for you, please leave like and or a comment. I'd love to hear your perspective. I think we all get better as we share our educated, come from curiosity type perspective. And let me know what you think. Thanks.